Good day everyone, so it's 2024 and I thought that we can at least start off with a bit of a Nilou bloom explosion because that's going to be incredibly fun. So for today's video we'll be looking at the Nilou bloom teams and discussing some practical and advanced aspects when it comes to using these teams, and I'll supplement what I have to say using GCSIM. So this is a Genshin simulator software and it will allow us to do a bit of TC, if you will, but a theory crafting from a what if analysis perspective. So hopefully you'll find that interesting and fun. It's basically letting the computer itself play against a couple of enemies and then seeing what happens. Now, if you've been around the block, you'll know that Nilou teams are historically very notorious for being difficult to theorycraft, but we finally now have the tools to actually tackle this appropriately. So let's begin. On screen you can see my Nilou bloom team that I just showed in the Spiral Abyss, as well as how this team would perform against two targets on the field, with their average DPS per second being 136. So if you're not familiar with GCSIM or how any of this works, don't worry, I'll have a follow-up video on it. But basically the TLDR is I can put in my artifacts, my weapons, I can tell the computer how it should go about playing with my team, and once I've told the computer what it should do, it will basically carry it out, and then we can assess some of the results. So you might say, oh, but what happens if I've got a C2 Nehida? How is that going to affect my DPS? Well, we just basically click here on the constellation, we make it 2, we can even change some of the artifacts or any of the weapons, but basically once you literally just click or change a couple of settings, you can now see the new results literally playing out in front of you live, and that's just what the power of these tools, that's just the power of what this tool can really mean for you. So this is what I really wanted to showcase to you guys today, but obviously this is not going to be just me like showing off how GCSIM works and so on, because we can really spend quite a long time discussing all of this. What I really want to talk about is a little something right here at the bottom for today's video, and that is called the target aura uptime. So basically, how do we manage the Nilou bloom auras? This is something that I've spoken about in the past, and when I presented this type of content to other people, a lot of them said that the dendro uptime was just not enough and that there was too much hydro, and comparing this to other simulations that other people have made me really realize that things are not always as intuitive and obvious as they might seem. Here you can see the actual target aura uptime on the enemies. So what the simulation in my particular case did is it had a mean of 10% aura on the hydro aura on the enemy, so that's the little thing above its head, and it basically also had 73% dendro aura onto the enemy. Now some of you might say, well, 10 plus 73, that's not 100%. Where's the remaining 17%? Well, that's basically due to the fact that the enemy might not have any aura on them at all. So let me quickly explain this. If you go here into sample into GCSIM, what you'll find is that we can actually look at how the auras are applied onto the enemies in absolute detail. So you can see I start off my rotation with Nehida's skill and her burst. The simulation literally goes frame by frame, so you can see here is the frame and the second. And what happens now is that when I swap to Kokomi and start using her skill, we're instantly starting to apply hydro onto dendro. You can see here there is the existing dendro, and then afterwards there is the 1.65 due to the hydro. So we can actually count these auras very very carefully. But in certain cases, if I just quickly scroll down here, you'll find that very curiously Kokomi's Bakekurage, that is the jellyfish, basically got rid of the one dendro aura on the first enemy, but it didn't get rid of the aura on the second enemy. So you can see here I've got no aura and then I've got dendro, which really then ties into the fact that there is also like a third metric here, which is the no target aura uptime, or the 17% no aura, which is what the computer is effectively counting. It's not a bad thing to have no aura on it. It just means in some cases that you've got effective like annihilation combination of the Dendro and the Hydro. So you've spawned like all the Dendro cores you can, and then obviously you're now waiting to reapply the Dendro or the Hydro onto the enemy. That's just basically what it means. But for most of us, as cool as all of these technical and frame-by-frame details is, a lot of you might be saying, well, how much is enough? How much target Dendro and target Hydro do I need? And the answer is, it really does depend on your team. It depends on your configuration and what it is that you're trying to do. So for instance, if we look at some of the Nilou Bloom teams, let's say here is one with Xingqiu, you'll notice that in this case with the triple Hydro Nahida, I'll have far more Hydro aura uptime, but obviously I'm expecting the loss of Dendro cores to be negated by the fact that Xingqiu is also going to be doing a bit more damage. So if I look at the character DPS, you can see here, yeah, that it's exactly as I'd expect. Xingqiu is contributing quite a bit more, whereas in my case, if we quickly look here at the results, you can see that basically it's just Kokomi carrying a lot of that. So she's applying Hydro onto the Dendro. Now, one of the fascinating things for me is to really then start again asking the what if question. What if we actually go and we change the Dendro to be applied more frequently than the Hydro, like some people have suggested? What is then going to happen to our team? So let's quickly go right here to the bottom. And basically here you can see when I use my Nilou's Elemental Burst, I'm now going to ask Nahida to attack 3 times. So let's see what this will do onto the enemies. In fact, let's just apply the maximum amount of Dendro that we can. So let's just do a Nahida charge attack there. Let's see what happens. Well, basically, yeah, I've lost some DPS. So even though I've gained a bit of a higher Dendro uptime, you can see there 76 as opposed to 73%, you can clearly see that we are producing fewer reactions per second, and that just leads us, well, we can see now after about 500 simulations already, just to a very clear loss of damage per second. So it's not always necessarily true that having a higher Dendro aura uptime will lead you to doing more damage. It's all about you being context aware of what abilities you're using. Sometimes even something as I'm using Nahida's skill and I just do one normal attack, that in and of itself might just lead you to a DPS loss, precisely because everything else that's going to happen, all of the other cooldowns, when the jellyfish tick, when Nilou's ring ticks, all of those things can just suddenly be out of whack. And that's what makes these Nilou teams really such a really fun to play and figure out, because the order in which you apply things, how you play with your characters really matters, like I've explained in the past. It's just now that with the simulation software being as advanced as it is, we can really start seeing what the effects of this would be like on the teams and so on. So let's try and do something really funky. So basically a lot of people have suggested in the past, well, let's just see what the normal sim is. So that's the normal like DPS we get. But a lot of people in the past have suggested that when you have Kole's Elemental Burst online, you do something like you use Kokomi's charge attack, or you do like a dash, you attack twice, you charge attack, you dash, you attack twice. So what happens when we do this, but just one more time? So some people have said that you need to do this a couple of times. So we'll now see exactly like what the implication is. And some people have also said N3, so it's into charge attack dash, N3 dash into charge attack. So that is the combination that some people might give us. So let's see what this will actually do. There we go. I've completed my configuration. So we're all clear. This is the number we're looking at. Let's now change and rerun it. And let's just see how this is going to affect the results. Well, it seems tentatively that we still have the same number of reactions per second, slightly lower DPS, and you can see here slightly bit more Hydro, but in essence not that much has changed. So this is once again the point. When it comes to managing your auras and your DPS, it can very often just be a couple of small tweaks that you need to make to your gameplay, and it's not really going to have a meaningful result. Whereas if you do some other things, you might find that your DPS DPS suddenly drops, and this is really what the simulation can give us out. I did discuss this before with my Nilou bloom against the dinosaur, where I basically showed that if you just use one extra Nahida normal attack, you've completely lost the Dendro aura on the enemy. So it shows you that whilst in certain cases, as you might expect, when there's lots of Dendro on the field, how you use your Hydro with Kokomi is just basically a difference between optimal combinations and very marginal DPS. Regardless, if you're ever in doubt, all you need to do is go here into GCSIM, into the sample, you choose your P50, so that's your median damage results. You look at what's happening, or you can even choose, I think, a specific iteration, but you can basically look, you can see who's applying what Hydron to what Dendro. You look at the details, and you can then just try and figure out perhaps why your team has a DPS loss or a DPS increase, etc, etc. So from my perspective, this is what's so cool about this technology. Anyone can use this. They can use the template I gave them. You can change the constellations, you can change the weapons, the artifacts. It's all incredibly simple, and I'll have a follow-up video explaining all of this in a bit more detail. But for now, I just wanted to talk about Nilou bloom teams. So before we end this off, let's just look at the Spiral Abyss one final time. So here we are against Little Thunderbird. We start off with Nahida's Elemental Burst because there is a spawn in delay for the Thunder manifestation, and this is just what I really wanted to show you guys. The enemies fly away. The enemies have different times to which they're invulnerable. There's so many practical things happening, and as imperfect as the simulations can be from something like GCSIM, they can still, at least to some degree, provide us with a bit of guidance as to what you should be doing. So for instance, in this case, one can just add in a spawn delay or something like that, and you'll be able to assess the effects. Regardless, I think that is enough for today's video. Hopefully you guys have found it interesting and that you'll enjoy this type of content more in the future. Thanks for watching.